Cast your mind back to Britain in the 1960s, a country that was finally beginning to breathe again. The streets were busier, the towns were growing, and for the very first time, ordinary working families were daring to imagine something that had once felt entirely out of reach, a car of their own, parked outside the front door, waiting for the weekend. It wasn't about wealth or status, it was about belonging to a new kind of Britain, one that was moving forward with quiet, determined pride. And the cars of that era moved right along with it, becoming part of the everyday fabric of life in a way that nothing quite has since. Some of those machines have long since disappeared from our roads, but others have never truly left, not from the streets, and certainly not from memory. One car in particular, waiting near the very top of this list, still stirs something deep in people that even the finest modern cars simply cannot touch. And if you grew up in Britain during those years, chances are at least one name on this list will take you straight back to a particular smell, a sound, or a Sunday morning you hadn't thought about in quite some time. If that feeling is something you value, subscribe to Britain Rewind and stay with us. Now let's begin with number 10. Number 10, Vauxhall Victor. The Vauxhall Victor arrived at the dawn of the decade wearing bold, American-influenced lines and sweeping fins, a striking sight on roads still dominated by the upright, post-war machines people had grown used to. You'd find one parked on terraced streets from Birmingham to Leeds, a quiet signal that the family next door had moved forward in life. It was roomy, solid, and comfortable enough for a proper family run to the seaside. But that's not the only reason people still remember it. The Victor gave a generation of British families their very first taste of modern motoring, the feeling that a car could be something to genuinely enjoy, not just use. For many households, it was the first car the family ever owned, and that kind of memory has a way of lasting far longer than the car itself. Number 9, Hillman Imp. The Hillman Imp arrived in 1963 with something to prove, and it proved it in the most endearing way imaginable. Built in Linwood, Scotland, it was a sprightly, rear-engined little machine, lightweight, nimble, and full of a character you simply didn't expect from a small family car of that era. It found its way into driveways across the country, particularly among younger drivers and smaller households looking for something affordable and lively. What made it truly special, however, was its personality. The Imp felt alive in a way that sensible family cars rarely did. It buzzed and rattled and made you feel part of the drive. Today, those who remember the Imp speak of it with a particular fondness usually reserved for something far more expensive, which tells you everything about what it meant to the people who loved it. Number 8, Triumph Herald. The Triumph Herald was one of those cars that seemed perfectly in tune with the spirit of the early 1960s. Sharp, stylish, and available across a range of body styles, saloon, convertible, and estate, it offered a versatility that felt genuinely ahead of its time. Middle-class families took to it warmly, and it became a familiar sight outside semi-detached houses and on weekend runs through the rolling British countryside. Its turning circle was famously remarkable, making it endlessly practical in busy town centres. But what the Herald truly offered went beyond practicality. It offered a sense of style at an accessible price that made its drivers feel good. That simple satisfaction of being in a car that suited you completely is something those who owned one have honestly never forgotten. Number 7, Austin Morris 1100. For much of the 1960s, the Austin and Morris 1100 sat comfortably at the top of Britain's sales charts, and it's not difficult to understand why. Sharing its clever engineering principles with the Mini, it delivered a smoothness of ride that genuinely surprised drivers who had grown used to stiffer, older machines. Teachers, nurses, and young families across the country relied on it every single day, and it rewarded them with quiet, unassuming dependability. But beneath that modest, rounded bodywork was something genuinely impressive, exceptional interior space and a quality of ride that usually cost far more elsewhere. And one car still ahead on this list carries that same brilliant engineering spirit into far more iconic territory. The 1100 may lack glamour, but those who drove one still remember it with a warmth that says absolutely everything. Number 6, Rover 2000. The Rover 2000, launched in 1963, was an altogether different kind of British car. solid, sophisticated, and built to a standard that felt almost architectural in its precision, it arrived as the quiet choice of the professional classes, the doctor, the senior manager, the man who had worked his way steadily upward and wanted a car that said so without any unnecessary noise. Inside, it was calm and composed, offering a driving experience that rewarded patience and control in equal measure. But the Rover 2000 was more than simply comfortable. It was genuinely advanced, with safety thinking and build quality that placed it apart from almost everything else on British roads. The Rover 2000 earned its place not through drama, but through quiet, enduring excellence, and perhaps that's exactly what makes what's still to come on this list so remarkable, because the cars ahead of it were loved in a way that goes far beyond excellence alone. Number 5. Austin-Healey 3000. The Austin-Healey 3000 was something else entirely. Low, wide, and growling with a confidence that felt almost theatrical, it brought genuine sports car drama to British roads at a time when most motoring was still thoroughly practical. It wasn't a car for everyone. It demanded something of its driver, a willingness to lean in, to feel the road beneath you, and to enjoy the experience rather than simply reach the destination. Weekend drivers fell in love with it instantly, and those lucky enough to own one rarely forgot the feeling of an open road stretching ahead. But what the Healey truly represented was British ambition made real, a machine that could hold its own against anything the world had to offer. Would it still turn heads today? Without the slightest question. Number 4. Ford Cortina. The Ford Cortina is perhaps the most quintessentially British car of the entire 1960s, and yet it came from a manufacturer most people wouldn't immediately associate with Britain at all. Launched in 1962, it rapidly became the car of the working family, the small businessman, and the everyday commuter, and you couldn't walk the length of a high street without spotting one. Clean-lined, affordable, and dependable, it offered something real for nearly everyone. But that's not the full picture. Beneath its sensible reputation lay a car with genuine spirit, particularly in its more powerful GT and Lotus variants, which attracted an entirely different kind of driver altogether. The Cortina didn't just sell in extraordinary numbers. It embedded itself quietly and permanently into the very fabric of British daily life. Number 3. Aston Martin DB5. The Aston Martin DB5 deserves to be told properly, because its story is about more than any single association. Built in Newport Pagnell and launched in 1963, it stands as arguably the most beautiful British car ever made, a handcrafted grand tourer that combined Italian-inspired elegance with restrained, purposeful British power. It was the car of gentlemen and quiet adventurers, of people who understood that true quality whispers rather than shouts. But what elevated the DB5 into genuine legend was its cultural moment. It became the very face of British cool at a time when the entire world was watching. That sense of effortless sophistication has never once faded. Even today, the sight of a DB5 on a quiet country road or emerging slowly from a morning mist produces a feeling that no modern machine quite manages to replicate. Number 2. Jaguar E-Type. When the Jaguar E-Type was unveiled in 1961, it reportedly made grown men weep, and that reaction tells you almost everything you need to know. Long, low, and impossibly elegant, the E-Type seemed to belong to some grander, more beautiful version of the world, and yet it was built right here in Britain, in Coventry, by craftsmen who understood precisely what they were creating. It was fast enough to embarrass far more expensive machines and beautiful enough to stop traffic without even trying. Middle-aged men saved for years. Young men simply dreamed. And across more than 60 years, that dream has never once dimmed. The E-Type remains one of the most genuinely desired cars in existence, and its place at number 2 on this list feels almost like an understatement. Number 1. Mini. And so we arrive at number 1. And if you've spent any time at all around British motoring, you probably knew it was coming. The Mini. Launched in 1959 and living fully into the spirit of the 1960s, it didn't simply change the way people drove. It changed the way they thought about cars altogether. Designed by Alec Isagonis and built by BMC, it packed a remarkable amount of interior space into a tiny, perfectly formed body that seemed almost impossible by the standards of the time. It belonged to everyone: working families on terrace streets, artists in Soho, weekend racing drivers, and even royalty, and that extraordinary inclusivity never once cheapened it. If anything, it only made it more beloved. The Mini became the face of an entire decade, bright, optimistic, and full of a cheeky, unshakable confidence that was entirely and unmistakably its own. But what is truly remarkable is not what it meant then. It's what it still means now. Do you have a memory of a Mini from your childhood? Decades later, it remains one of the most recognized shapes in the world, a piece of Britain that the whole world took to heart and has never quite given back. And there they are, 10 cars that didn't simply move people from one place to another. They moved them in ways that had nothing whatsoever to do with engines or roads. Britain in the 1960s was a country finding itself again, rebuilding, expanding, and beginning, slowly, to dream, and the cars of that era were woven into that story in ways that are easy to overlook today. They sat on drives and outside corner shops. They carried families to places still talked about at kitchen tables decades later. They were the backdrop to first dates, school runs, and summer holidays that felt as though they'd never end. Do you remember the car your family owned back then? Or perhaps one from this list takes you somewhere specific, a particular smell, a sound, a quietly perfect afternoon. We'd love to hear your memory in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey, please give the video a like and subscribe to Britain Rewind for more. Because these weren't just cars. They were the places where British life truly happened.